The fraud model your bank deployed 18 months ago, it's catching 30 to 40% less fraud today than the day you launched it. And nobody on your team has noticed. Nobody's flagged it. Nobody's raised their hand in a meeting and said, "Hey, I think our model is broken." Because from the outside, everything looks fine. The dashboards are green, the system is running, alerts are firing, but underneath all of that, your model is quietly falling apart. And by the time you realize it, the damage is already done. Let me explain why this is a ticking time bomb sitting inside your organization right now. I am Sahil Kataria, founder of Flux Force AI. Financial risk decoded. So here's what's actually happening. When your data science team built that fraud model, whether it was last year, 2 years ago, whenever, they trained it on historical fraud patterns, the patterns that existed at that time, the techniques fraudsters were using at that point. And on day one, that model was sharp, 95% detection accuracy, maybe higher. Everyone celebrated. The board got a nice presentation. We've deployed AI for fraud detection. Check the box. But here's the thing nobody talks about at that board meeting. Fraudsters don't stand still. They adapt, they evolve, they test your defenses, they share tactics on dark web forums, they probe your systems for blind spots. And within 3 to 6 months, the fraud landscape has shifted underneath your model's feet. The model trained on last year's fraud, it looks at this year's fraud and sees normal. It sees legitimate transactions because it was never taught to recognize the new patterns. And this isn't theory. Industry research from firms like McKinsey, Gartner, the Federal Reserve consistently shows that fraud models lose 20 to 40% of their effectiveness within 12 to 18 months without retraining. Some degrade even faster, depending on the product line. Think about that. Imagine a graph in your mind. Day 1, 95% accuracy. Month 6, 85%. Month 12, 75%. Month 18, you're down to 60, maybe 62%. That's not a slow decline. That's nearly half your fraud slipping through. And the scariest part? There is no alarm bell. No pop-up that says, "Hey, your model is now performing worse than a coin flip on new fraud types." It just quietly degrades. That's what model drift is. And it is the number one silent risk in AI-based fraud detection today. Now you might be thinking, okay, but surely someone on the team notices, right? Surely there's a report somewhere that shows performance is declining? And the answer, in most banks I've seen, no, nobody notices. And here's why. The way most banks monitor their fraud model is they check if the model is running. Is it up? Is it processing transactions? Are alerts being generated? Yes? Great, everything's working. But running and performing are two completely different things. Your car engine can be running while your brakes are failing. The engine light is off. Everything sounds fine, but you have no stopping power. That's exactly what's happening with these models. And then you get the second problem, the ops team, the people reviewing the alerts. As the model degrades, what happens? False positives start creeping up. The model starts flagging legitimate transactions as suspicious. Your operations team is now reviewing more and more alerts that turn out to be nothing. Monday morning, 200 alerts. Tuesday, 250. By Thursday, they're drowning. So what do? They start triaging harder. They start skipping the ones that look probably fine. They develop shortcuts. They get alert fatigue. And here's the other side of that same coin. While false positives are going up, false negatives are going up too. Real fraud is slipping through. Actual fraudulent transactions that the model used to catch are now being classified as normal. Your fraud losses start climbing, slowly at first, then faster. But nobody connects the dots. The fraud team says fraud is up across the industry. The ops team says we're overwhelmed with alerts. The data science team says the model is performing within acceptable parameters because they're measuring the wrong metrics or using stale benchmarks. Everyone has a piece of the puzzle. Nobody sees the full picture. And that gap between what your dashboard shows and what's actually happening, that gap is where millions of dollars disappear. Now, if the financial losses weren't enough to keep you up at night, let me add regulatory risk to the equation. Because regulators have caught on. The OCC in the United States, the FCA in the UK, MAS in Singapore. they're all moving in the same direction. And the question they're starting to ask, in examinations, in supervisory letters, in guidance documents, is this: how do you monitor the ongoing performance of your AI models? Not, did you validate the model when you deployed it? That's table stakes. They want to know, what are you doing today, right now, to ensure that model is still performing as intended? And if you don't have a good answer, that's a finding. It gets worse. There's the explainability question. Regulators are asking, if your model missed a fraud pattern, can you explain why? Can you point to the specific drift in the data? Can you show what changed between when the model was trained and when it failed? If your model drifted and you didn't know, and it missed a fraud ring, and that fraud ring generated SAR reportable activity that you failed to file, you now have a BSA AML problem on top of a fraud problem. That's not hypothetical. That's the trajectory the industry is on right now. The OCC's guidance on model risk management, SR 11-7, which has been the industry standard for over a decade, explicitly requires ongoing monitoring of model performance. Not annual, ongoing. Most banks treat model validation as a once-a-year event. Get the consultant in, run the tests, generate the report, file it, done for another 12 months. But model drift doesn't wait for your annual review cycle. It happens in real time. And regulators are increasingly saying your monitoring needs to match the pace of the risk. Consent orders, matters requiring attention, civil money penalties. These are the tools regulators use when they find gaps. And unmonitored AI? That's going to be one of the biggest gap areas in the next examination cycle. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm telling you what's coming. And for some institutions, it's already here. So what do the banks that get this right actually do? And I want to be clear, some banks do get this right. The top 10, maybe 15%. Here's what separates them. First, they monitor precision and recall continuously. Not quarterly, not monthly, continuously. They have dashboards, real ones, not vanity dashboards, that show how the model's precision and recall metrics are trending over time. When precision drops, they know false positives are rising. When recall drops, they know real fraud is being missed. They watch these numbers the way a trader watches a position. Second, they have automated drift detection with threshold alerts. When performance drops below a predefined level, say recall falls below 85%, an alert fires. And that alert doesn't go to the data science team's backlog. It goes to the risk committee. Because model drift is a risk problem, not a data science problem. Third, they run quarterly model revalidation cycles, not just annual. Every quarter, they compare current model performance against the original validation benchmarks. They document the results. They generate reports that are ready for a regulator to review. No scrambling when the examiner shows up. And fourth, they keep humans in the loop for edge cases. They don't blindly trust the model. They have experienced fraud analysts reviewing the borderline cases, the transactions the model is uncertain about, because that's where drift shows up first, at the edges. These 4 practices aren't revolutionary. They're not expensive, they're not complex to implement, but the vast majority of banks don't do them. Because the model was deployed, the box was checked, and everyone moved on to the next project. So here's my question to you. If you're running a fraud model right now that hasn't been revalidated in the last 6 months, if you don't have automated drift detection, if nobody on your team can tell you today whether your model's recall rate is higher or lower than it was when you launched it, you have a problem you don't know about yet. And I say that not to sell you something, but because I've seen it happen too many times. Good teams, good intentions, but no visibility into what's actually happening under the hood. I'm building FluxForce because model drift is a structural failure, not a people failure. Aiden Flux, our fraud detection agent, is production ready today. Continuous drift monitoring is where we're heading next. If you run fraud ops or model risk at a mid-market bank and this problem keeps you up at night, I want to hear from you. Not to pitch, because the people closest to this problem should shape the solution. Link in the description. And if this was useful, share it with your head of risk. Share it with your fraud team, because if they don't know about this problem yet, they need to. I'll see you in the next one.